I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. If you think the Democrats have been in disarray lately, you wouldn't be alone. House Speaker Pelosi usually has an iron grip on her caucus, but even she had to cancel her own vote deadline on the public works bill because progressives insisted that the Senate vote first on the Biden budget. President Biden went to the Hill, presumably to push for a vote on the infrastructure bill, but left siding with the progressives. Biden's poll numbers have bounced back, with Reuters Ipsos having him with a 48% job approval, 47% disapproving. Last week, a Quinnipiac poll had him with a 38% approval number. Times columnist Charles Blow wrote this week, quote, "The Democrats are staring down real danger. They just aren't getting enough done. They aren't moving quickly enough on President Biden's major campaign promises. The warning signs are all around." So how much danger are the Democrats really in? And House progressives are flexing their muscles, defying their speaker and their president. Is the rising power of progressives politically good or bad for the Democrats? Let's talk politics with Lisa Learer, a Times national political correspondent, and Jane Coaston, host of the popular Times podcast, The Argument. Let's look a little bit first, Lisa. We were comparing President Biden with FDR, his beginning of his term. Is that comparison now out the window? Have things been going just too slowly for President Biden?
Well, it might have been the wrong comparison for the administration to be making, because FDR, of course, had much bigger majorities in Congress that allows you to get a legislation through or makes it easier. Biden also tried to do something that was quite a bit more ambitious in some ways than what FDR did. Rather than breaking up his proposal into various parts and passing them through over a period of months or years, they sort of bundled the entire domestic agenda into this one economic, the Build Back Better package, and tried to push it through. And there were a lot of political calculations that made sense that the administration made. They know that they have very slim majorities in the House and in the Senate, that they're likely to lose those majorities in the midterms. And this was sort of their best chance to get that agenda through. What I think they might have underestimated is the mandate they had within their own caucus and the divisions that would emerge there between Democrats. And that's what we're seeing play out now.
Jane, is bipartisanship still the way to go? And if it isn't the way to go, what other alternative is there?
I think that bipartisanship would be the way to go if you had a opposition party that was interested in doing anything but posing as the opposition. The point that the Republicans want to make here is that they are the opposition. They are going to be the party of no. We remember this from Obama's first term, and we're seeing it again. And I think that in this particular case, again, we see that the Democrats have enough to do with an increasingly widened tent. I think that's something that people forget about a lot, is that as the Republican tent widened during the Trump years, the Democratic Party widened during the Trump years as well, where you had a host of people who had an exodus from the Republican Party, came over to the Democratic Party, but progressives were already there. So you're seeing more division within the Democratic Party, as you would as any tent widens. But I think that right now, I think bipartisanship, especially when you have a Republican Party that has absolutely no interest in helping the Democrats do literally anything, I think that bipartisanship isn't an option here.
Lisa, you wrote a story this week in the Times that was fascinating, has implications for the New Jersey governor's race and possibly for New York's next year. Looking at the Virginia gubernatorial race, there's sort of a new element in the culture wars going on in schools, mask mandates, critical race theory. Has that become the new battleground for conservatives and progressives?
Well, certainly it's the battleground conservatives would like to be playing on. They know it's something that really energizes their base. It allows them to group in a number of issues around schools that really unite their party. Things like, you have the moderate wing of the Republican Party that just wants to see their kids staying in school. You have the more sort of Trump conservative wing that is concerned about these things like critical race theory, which of course is not being taught. It's an advanced academic concept. Maybe people talk about it in college. It's something that is not happening in elementary, middle, or even high schools, but it's something that conservatives are very concerned about and very worked up about, really as a response to, I think, a lot of the protests around race that we saw last year. So it's something that Republicans see as a way to energize and unify their party and get their people out. And it comes at a time where we've seen a number of signs showing a lack of enthusiasm among Democrats to get out and vote. And that is something that is really concerning to party leaders, to candidates, really up and down the Democratic ranks, that Democratic voters are tired. They don't have Trump, which was really the Democrats' best motivator for the past 4 years, really pushing their people to the polls. And, these midterm elections, and particularly elections like the one we're having in Virginia, these off-year elections, really depend on which party can get more of their voters to the polls. Voter turnout overall is lower. So party enthusiasm matters a lot here.
So, Jane, what does the president do? What does Congress do among the Democrats? Do they lean center or lean left? How do you get that vote out? Do you have to then cater to the progressives in Congress?
I think that what the Democrats need to lean to is something that my colleague and our colleague here at the Times has been talking about a lot, Ezra Klein, which is towards popularism. Because what you're hearing from voters—
as opposed to populism.
Right, popularism. Do things that are popular, not populist, two very different words. I think that something that we're forgetting a little bit in this conversation, and something I think a lot of people are missing, is that for millions of Americans, it's the pandemic, stupid. Until we get a handle on the pandemic, until we get a handle on what you can and cannot do about booster shots, about the money that so many people have been going without, until we get a handle on essential workers who've been working this entire time, until we get a handle on all of these aspects of American life that have been altered by the pandemic, I think that that's the key here. What is popular right now is what the Democrats should be going after. I think that something that I live in Washington, D.C., so I have a pretty good bird's eye view on the Virginia gubernatorial race. And it's interesting to me that it seems to be that Republicans are once again attempting to throw anything at the wall and see what sticks. And I'm concerned that political reporters are falling into that. If we remember a couple of years ago, it seemed there were a lot of people reporting that there was a good chance Republicans are going to win the governor's race over statues. And now that feels like that was 3,000 years ago. Republicans are going to keep coming up with things that are reasons why you should vote for Republicans that can't actually fix the thing you're supposed to be mad about. Democrats need to stay focused on COVID. Democrats need to stay focused on doing things that are popular, not complexly popular. Ask voters what they want. Voters are complex people, but generally they're going to say, like, I want to know about, like, that COVID is dealt with. I want this to be over. I am tired of this. That's what I think a lot of people are thinking. And that's what I think Congress and the president should be focused on.
Lisa, assuming that's what people want, and it seems pretty reasonable that people would want that, what can the president, what can the Democrats in Congress do about it?
Well, they have to pass things, right? Like, I think Jane is absolutely right. I think the midterms and maybe even the Virginia governor's race will be a referendum on Biden's central promise, which was to return the country to some sense of normalcy. And I think she's also right that people don't feel that right now. But they don't feel it in their schools, which is where Republicans see an opening. They don't feel it in their workplaces. They don't feel it in their pocketbooks and their employment situation. So the question for Democrats really becomes, how quickly can they get the country to a place where people have that sense of normalcy? And I think some of that involves showing that they're able to get something done in Washington. That, of course, was another central promise of Biden, that he was this very experienced legislator with 50 years in the Senate who could get things done and get them done on a bipartisan basis. We all can see that that's not going to happen. Bipartisanship really has very little chance of happening. But they have to pass something. They need to have something to run on, which is why the stakes are so high for what's happening right now and these divisions. And the longer this takes, the closer we get to those midterm elections and the harder it gets for them to get something through.
Jane, the margin in the Senate is tight enough. Is Nancy Pelosi losing any element of control in the House?
I don't think so. I think that the key here, I want to go back to something that we just discussed, which is that the idea of getting stuff done is not so much about the conceit of getting something done, but what you are getting done. I think that when you look at the voters who gave Democrats a majority in the House and gave Democrats a majority in the Senate, slim as it may be, there are things that they want done. And I think that what I'm very concerned that we're getting too tied up in kind of the palace theatrics of what's taking place in the House, and not as focused on what is actually supposed to be taking place here, on the actual infrastructure bills, on the actual spending bills, on where is this all supposed to be going. I have no doubt that Nancy Pelosi can keep control of what's taking place in the House. Keep control of what's taking place in the House to do what? I don't know.
Lisa, I know I've been naively asking this question now for years, but how long can the Republicans get away with not doing anything?
Well, it doesn't seem to be hurting them among their voters. Their voters are, of course, a smaller share of the country, but there are a larger share in places that determine, the majorities in Congress. So far, that seems to be working for them. I'm not sure that Democrats are presenting much of a counter argument, because a lot of their central promises are things that feel very difficult to happen, like voting rights or criminal justice reform. Those are things that were talked a lot on the campaign trail, which they have no Republican support for and don't have enough Democratic support for in the Senate without upending the filibuster, which seems like there's not a lot of political interest in making, or not enough political interest across the board in making happen. So it seems like Republicans could keep doing this for quite a while. We'll have to see how it all plays out, but it doesn't seem like it's been hurting them as of yet.
Jane, Lisa talked about critical race theory becoming a issue in the Virginia race, perhaps in New Jersey, and maybe next year in New York as well. I think if you stop most people on the street and say, what is critical race theory, the majority will have not the slightest idea. But you talked about on the argument, at what point do we get an honest grounding so we can successfully engage in a conversation about race? How do we? And you talked about, do diversity programs do more harm than good? Can we really teach America that it has been racist? How do we get a grip on this problem? John McWhorter talks about in the Times how we deal with words and phrases like whipped cream. Can we talk about to be honest? Is that an offensive phrase? How do we wrap our arms around things like this in a honest way without being confrontational?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think that what we are seeing, and I was fascinated to note that if you track the references to critical race theory on Fox News, they've actually decreased since June. Every couple of months, there's a thing, and everyone pursues the thing, and the thing is a big deal, and you're either for the thing or you're against the thing, but you got to fight about the thing, and then the thing changes. It was Dr. Seuss, and then it was critical race theory, and then it'll be immigration again in another 2 weeks. There's always a thing. And I think that what we've seen in a host of states like Tennessee is that you have groups who are purportedly opposed to what they are calling critical race theory, but they want to ban books about Ruby Bridges from schools because they are worried that they might be too sad for students, which is an ironic twist on the idea of snowflakes and participation trophies. But I think that to your actual question, the real question is, for what purpose? Wrap our arms around this subject to do what? I'm actually having a conversation on Thursday night with John McWhorter. It's a subscribers only event and people can tune in. And I want to get at the idea that we keep saying, like, it's time to have an honest conversation about race. How do we have this conversation? But a conversation to do what? I don't want to just talk about race. I could talk about race all day. I find the subject and the conceit fascinating, but I want to know what it is for. Is it to make people make fewer racial assumptions? Is it to reduce the sting of racism? Is it to explain what racism and the experience of racism feels like to someone who hasn't faced that? I want to know what is the point here? Because I think that so much we deify the conceit of the conversation, but we need to know where we're trying to go. If we're going to have an argument, the point is, what are we arguing and why are we doing it? And I think that until we know what we're trying to gather ourselves around and for what purpose, I don't know if we can get there.
Otherwise, we're just walking in circles, indeed.
Exactly.
Very quickly, Lisa, is there a civil war in the Democratic Party, or can all these people get together and actually pass legislation?
We'll have to see. I mean, I think the political incentives for passing something popular are pretty strong. I think that's fairly widely recognized. So it seems like they could get somewhere, and this is how congressional negotiations tend to go. It's loggerhead, 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 and then they sort of get a deal. So I'm not sure we're at civil war phase quite yet, but I think there's a lot of negotiating that still has to happen.
Thank you both so much, Jane Coaston, Lisa Lira of the New York Times. And coming up next, the crisis at Rikers Island. Rikers Island is one of the world's biggest correctional institutions. To put it bluntly, it's a hellhole with a reputation for violence and abuse and neglect of its inmates. In 2017, Mayor de Blasio announced his intention to close Rikers within 10 years. Not much has happened since. In September, members of New York's congressional delegation wrote to President Biden asking him to intervene in what they called the humanitarian crisis at Rikers. When that letter became known, suddenly de Blasio decided to visit Rikers, which he hadn't done in 4 years. Also in September, Governor Hochul ordered the release of 191 Rikers inmates. The headline of a Times editorial last month read, quote, "The endless catastrophe of Rikers Island." And in a front page story this week, the Times reported, quote, "Much has been made of the crisis gripping Rikers. The pandemic and subsequent staffing emergency have taken a brutal toll on incarcerated people and jailers alike, but the sheer lawlessness inside the compound is difficult to fathom. No one questions the horrible situation at Rikers, so why hasn't anything been done about it?" Jan Ransom is an investigative reporter for the Times. She's been covering the Rikers story along with Jonah Bromwich and Rebecca Davis O'Brien. Now, Jan, how can it be that the inmates seem to be running the asylum there? We know that there have been absences, there have been sick outs by the correctional staff. Is this a question of people actually missing? Is it a question of complicity? What is going on there?
Right. I think you mentioned this earlier in your question. I mean, you have officers who are not showing up to work, and we're not talking, one or two or three. We're talking over 1,600 officers at this point. And so that has an effect on the entire system. You need the officers to escort people to various places, to take them to clinic and mental health, and just to run the essentials of the jail. And what you see is a breakdown of the basic functions of the jail system here. And you have detainees taking up the slack there to some extent.
So is this a problem with them not showing up? If everyone showed up, would Rikers be running perfectly?
Don't think Rikers would be running perfectly. Rikers has had a number of issues dating back decades. So by no sense perfectly, but it would be running better. People would be able to, like I said, get down to see medical and mental health, be able to get food services. And all of that has pretty much slowed or is not happening. The people who are not showing up are abusing sick leave policy, which is very generous. Others are just not showing up at all.
The jail population, as you pointed out, is the lowest it's been in decades. Why aren't these guards showing up? Are they afraid? Are they sick? What's the problem?
So this started at the height of the pandemic last year, where you saw the highest number of officers out sick. And, a lot of them were genuinely sick. As time wore on, the morale plummeted. They felt like they were not supported by the mayor, by their supervisors. Many of them, like I said, got sick, some died. This had an impact on them. They were forced to then work triple shifts, which is 24 hours or more, with no food, no breaks, no water, in the same jail conditions that we hear detainees talk and complain about. And so it took a toll on them. And so some people, yeah, just decided not to show up. Others are just kind of tired with of the conditions that they're facing right now. It's been a lot.
Is it the city's fault? Is it the union's fault? Is it the fault of camaraderie among the colleagues? What is going to be done about this?
Yeah, so the mayor blames the union. They sued the union in court, accusing them of an illegal strike, whereas the union has said that the city has failed to provide safe and humane conditions for the officers to work in.
And is this true, or is there some level, as I mentioned earlier, without accusing anybody, of some complicity between the guards who are working and the inmates?
Yeah, and I think the city would say that definitely the union is behind this. There's no way to know for sure. I think there are people who are genuinely just, through with the way things are and the lack of support that they've had. And then, from the union standpoint about the city, yeah, I mean, the conditions definitely are inhumane. I think anyone who's visited the jails in the past few months would say that. And anyone who's been held there has definitely said that.
Jen, we were supposed to see some improvement because of bail reform. Reform, of course, being a loaded word suggesting improvement. Has that made any sort of difference?
So we saw a difference early on in the pandemic. As you stated early on, the jail population dropped to the lowest it's been since the 1940s. It was over 3,000 detainees there. But that changed for a number of reasons. There was a slight rollback of some of the reforms that we saw early last year, and that led to an increase in the people being held on Rikers for pretrial matters. And you also saw, an increase in crime. So it was like a bunch of different things happening at once. You saw judges reacting to the reaction to the increase in crime. And so all of those factors caused the jail population to increase, but it's still the lowest it's been in decades.
We didn't see much constructive done by the Bloomberg administration regarding Rikers Island, but you'd think that de Blasio would regard this a little bit more as his constituency. How come the mayor hasn't done much about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, people from all sides have been begging him to pay more attention to Rikers, but he hadn't been in 4 years. And when he went to Rikers, he didn't speak to any of the people being held there or the people working there. So you have a lot of people questioning how much he really cared about changing the place. He did move to close Rikers, but even that plan is up in the air, right? Because we're going to have a new mayor, and that likely mayor will be Eric Adams, who has already said publicly that he's not in support of some of the locations for the new jail. So that begs the question, what really then is the future of Rikers?
And even if we close Rikers, does that mean we're going to multiply the problem by 4 by having 4 Rikers in effect in each borough, 1 in each borough, or is that really going to be a solution to the problem?
And that's something that a lot of people have talked about, right? Because a lot of the issues facing Rikers has to do with the culture there. And so, would changing the scenery is suddenly, get rid of this culture that has persisted for decades? It's yet to be determined. But I think there are clear problems with the facilities on Rikers Island. As I reported, some of the cells don't lock. And so that's like an added issue in terms of security when you have detainees kind of just able to walk out at will. We also reported about a detainee who was able to kick down a gate and enter a cell and assault another incarcerated person. And so, you have these real serious issues with the facilities. And not to mention, among the most disturbing aspects of that is because the infrastructure is crumbling, some detainees are able to fashion weapons out of plexiglass or scraps of metal. So all of this, the actual physical plant does pose a danger. And, you have advocates saying that people just need to get out of that facility.
And as you reported in the Times, an insane case of an inmate actually hijacking a bus inside the Rikers Island jail. Is there any racial element to this? Most of the prisoners on Rikers who are waiting trial in detention are Black and Hispanic. What about the guards? Upstate, we know many of the guards are white. What about on Rikers Island?
So most of the correction officers on Rikers are predominantly Black and Latino. And, they live in the same neighborhoods that have been ravaged by the pandemic, Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. And so, yeah, that's the makeup. And most of them are also female.
Mm-hmm. So that isn't really an issue here, is it? Or is it?
No, it's not something that we're seeing as an issue for this situation.
Well, that at least is a silver lining, I guess one might say. Thanks to Jan Ransom, and we look forward to more reporting on Rikers Island. And for the New York Times and CUNY TV, I am Sam Roberts.